Of all the Nazis the Allies could have assassinated, why did they choose him? Not Hitler, not Himmler, not Goebbels. They chose Reinhard Heydrich, and the decision cost over 5,000 innocent people their lives. This is the only time the Allies successfully assassinated a top-ranking Nazi official, and the story of why they did it, how they pulled it off, and what happened next is darker than you might imagine. To understand why Heydrich was the target, you need to know who he was. Reinhard Heydrich wasn't just another Nazi. He was arguably the third most powerful man in the Third Reich, behind only Hitler and Himmler. He was chief of the Reich Security Main Office, the RSHA. That meant he controlled the Gestapo, the SS intelligence service, and the entire Nazi security apparatus. But his real claim to infamy? He was the principal architect of the final solution. On January 20th, 1942, just 4 months before his death, Heydrich chaired the Wannsee Conference. That 90-minute meeting in a villa outside Berlin coordinated the systematic murder of 11 million European Jews. The attendees discussed logistics, transportation schedules, and methods of killing. Not one person objected. After the meeting ended, Heydrich sat by the fireplace with his deputies, smoking cigars and drinking brandy. According to later testimony, it was rare to see the normally austere Heydrich enjoying himself. But he had reason to celebrate. He'd just secured control over the largest genocide in history. The Czechs called him the Butcher of Prague. Even other Nazis thought he was cold. Himmler once called him the man with the iron heart. In September 1941, Hitler appointed Heydrich acting Reich protector of Bohemia and Moravia, what we know today as the Czech Republic. Within 3 days of his arrival, he'd executed 92 people. Within months, he'd arrested between 4,000 and 5,000 Czech patriots, executing 400 to 500 of them. He was efficient, he was brutal, and he was making Czechoslovakia into a model Nazi territory. If you appreciate deep dives into history's biggest what-ifs like this, I'd be grateful if you'd consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps more people discover these stories. And drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. So, why did the Allies choose to assassinate Heydrich instead of someone higher up the chain? The answer comes down to politics and desperation. By late 1941, Czechoslovakia had a problem. The country was under German occupation, but unlike Poland, Yugoslavia, or Greece, there was virtually no visible Czech resistance. The territory was quiet. Czechs were producing war materials for Germany. Production was actually up under Heydrich's rule. Eduard Beneš, the Czech president in exile in London, was watching his country's reputation collapse. At Allied meetings, Czechoslovakia was ranked dead last in terms of resistance efforts. He was terrified that if the Czechs didn't fight back, the Allies might ignore Czech interests when negotiating the post-war settlement. Beneš needed something dramatic, something that would prove the Czechs were on the Allied side, something that would generate international attention and sympathy. He decided to assassinate a top Nazi, not in Germany, where it would be nearly impossible, but right in Prague, in the heart of the occupied territory. The British Special Operations Executive, the SOE, agreed to help. They saw multiple benefits. First, it would demonstrate that even high-ranking Nazis weren't safe from Allied retribution. Second, it would potentially disrupt Nazi security operations if they lost their security chief. Third, it might inspire resistance movements across occupied Europe. The question was, who should the target be? They considered Karl Hermann Frank, Heydrich's deputy. But Heydrich was the bigger prize. He was one of the most powerful Nazis. He had just chaired the Wannsee Conference. He was the acting ruler of the Czech territories. And critically, he was arrogant. Here's the part that would seal his fate. Hitler had given Heydrich 3 direct orders for his safety. Use an armored vehicle. Travel with an armed escort. Vary his route daily. Heydrich ignored all three. He drove through Prague in an open-top Mercedes without bodyguards. He took the same route every morning. He believed himself untouchable, beyond the reach of the resistance. That arrogance would kill him. In October 1941, Czech intelligence chief František Moravec selected 2 soldiers from the 2,000 Czechs in exile in Britain. Josef Gabčík, a Slovak. Jan Kubiš, a Czech. The British SOE trained them in Scotland for months. Weapons, explosives, survival techniques. The mission was codenamed Operation Anthropoid, Greek for having the form of a human. On December 28, 1941, they parachuted into Czechoslovakia with 2 other teams. The drop was rough. They lost equipment. They had to make contact with the underground resistance, who were terrified of what reprisals and assassination might bring. By spring 1942, the mission was in trouble. Other parachute teams had been captured or killed. Security was tightening. The resistance sent desperate messages to London. Cancel the mission. The reprisals will destroy us. But London didn't cancel. In fact, the order was confirmed. Kill Heydrich. Then they got word. Heydrich might be leaving Prague for a new position in France. If he left in triumph, the mission would be a complete failure. They had to act immediately. They scouted his route. Every morning at 10:30 a.m., Heydrich's green Mercedes would slow down for a sharp hairpin turn in the Prague suburb of Liben, near Bulovka Hospital. That's where they'd strike. May 27, 1942. Gabčík and Kubiš positioned themselves at the tram stop. A third operative, Josef Valček, stood further up the street with a mirror to signal when Heydrich's car was approaching. The dark green Mercedes approached, slowing for the sharp curve. Gabčík stepped forward, raised his Sten submachine gun from under his raincoat and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. The gun jammed. For a moment, time froze. Gabčík stood there in disbelief. Heydrich's car rounded the corner, the Nazi looking directly at his would-be assassin. But instead of ordering his driver to speed away, Heydrich made a fatal mistake. He ordered the car to stop. He was going to fight back. As the Mercedes ground to a halt, Heydrich stood up and drew his pistol. That's when Kubiš acted. He hurled a modified anti-tank grenade. The explosion was massive. But here's the twist. The grenade didn't even hit Heydrich directly. It detonated against the rear wheel of the Mercedes. What killed one of the most powerful Nazis in history wasn't the bomb itself. It was horsehair from the car's upholstery, metal fragments from the vehicle, dirt and debris, all of it driven deep into his body, embedding in his spleen. Heydrich actually got up. He chased Gabčík on foot, firing his pistol before collapsing. His driver pursued Kubiš until the assassin shot him in the leg. Both assassins escaped into the chaos of the Prague streets, and both believed they had completely failed. Heydrich was alive, walking, shooting back. They fled thinking the mission was a disaster. They had no idea that the dirty car fragments were slowly killing him from the inside. Heydrich was rushed to Bulovka Hospital. The wounds didn't look immediately fatal. Broken rib, ruptured diaphragm, fragments in his spleen. Doctors were cautiously optimistic, but 8 days later, on June 4, 1942, sepsis set in, blood poisoning from the embedded debris. He died in agony, killed not by Allied explosives, but by infected horsehair from his own luxury car. Hitler was furious, not just at the assassination, but at Heydrich's carelessness. Hitler privately said, "Driving in an open, unarmored vehicle. Just damned stupidity. That a man as irreplaceable as Heydrich should expose himself to unnecessary danger, I can only condemn as stupid and idiotic." But publicly, Hitler gave Heydrich an elaborate state funeral. He placed the German Order, the Blood Order Medal and other decorations on Heydrich's funeral pillow. And then he ordered revenge. Hitler's initial order: execute 10,000 randomly selected Czechs. After consultation with his advisors, he modified the plan. Random massacres might hurt war production, but targeted reprisals? Those would send a message. The Nazis tortured members of the resistance. On June 13th, a Czech paratrooper named Karel Čurda, terrified for his family, betrayed the assassin's location. Gabčík, Kubiš, and 5 other resistance fighters had taken refuge in the Church of Saints Cyril and Methodius in Prague. On June 18th, 800 SS and Gestapo surrounded the church. The battle lasted for hours. The assassins retreated to the crypt beneath the church. The Germans tried to flush them out with gunfire, tear gas, and by flooding the crypt with water from Prague's fire brigade. Finally, they used explosives to break through. The 7 paratroopers inflicted heavy casualties. Despite being outnumbered over 100 to 1, they killed 14 SS men and wounded 21 more in that church. But eventually, surrounded and out of ammunition, they made their choice. Rather than surrender, all 7 men committed suicide. Some died from wounds sustained in the firefight. Others, including Gabčík, took cyanide in the flooded crypt. But the betrayer, Karel Čurda, didn't just collect his reward of 1 million Reichsmarks. The Nazis gave him something else, a new identity. They renamed him Karl Gerhardt, gave him German nationality, married him to a German woman, the sister-in-law of a Gestapo official. Then they used him as what they called a walking trap. Čurda would pose as a British agent, gain the trust of resistance members, identify them, and then watch as the Gestapo arrested them. He personally led to the capture and execution of hundreds more Czechs before war's end. At his 1947 treason trial, when asked how he could betray his friends, Čurda showed no remorse. He allegedly said, "I think you would have done the same for 1 million marks." He was hanged on April 29, 1947 at Pankráč prison. But that was just the beginning. Here's where the story gets truly absurd and tragic. The Nazis needed someone to blame. They tortured resistance members, searched for connections, and they found one, based on a complete lie. A man named Václav Žiha had been having an affair. When he ended it, he wrote his mistress a dramatic breakup letter claiming he'd been involved in assassinating Heydrich. He hadn't. He was just trying to make himself sound important, dangerous, mysterious. A factory owner intercepted the letter and reported it to the Gestapo. Based on this false claim in a breakup letter, the Nazis chose the village of Lidice for total annihilation. On June 10, 1942, German forces surrounded Lidice, a small village of about 500 people, 12 miles from Prague. They shot every male over the age of 14, 173 men and boys. They deported the women to Ravensbrück concentration camp. Most died there. They examined the children. Some with Aryan features were selected for Germanization, adopted by German families. 81 children were murdered in gas vans at Chełmno extermination camp. Then, they burned Lidice to the ground. They leveled the ruins with explosives. They attempted to erase the village from the map. A similar fate befell the village of Ležáky on June 24th. All 33 adults were shot. The children were sent to concentration camps. Bishop Gorazd, the leader of the Orthodox Church who had sheltered the assassins, turned himself in to spare other church members. He wrote to Nazi authorities, "I and I alone am responsible." He was executed along with his priests. None betrayed the resistance under torture. Marie Moravkova, the mother of one resistance member, took cyanide rather than face Gestapo interrogation. Her entire family was executed. In the immediate reprisals, over 1,300 Czechs were executed, but thousands more were arrested and deported to concentration camps like Mauthausen, where few survived. When you count the long-term deaths from these deportations, the total death toll from the Heydrich reprisals, the second Heydrichiad as it became known, reached an estimated 5,000 or more. 5,000 people dead to avenge one Nazi. So was Operation Anthropoid worth it? This question haunted Czech leaders then, and historians still debate it today. The immediate military impact was minimal. Heinrich Himmler personally took over Heydrich's duties until Ernst Kaltenbrunner was appointed as permanent replacement. But here's the darkest irony. The final solution actually accelerated after Heydrich's death. The death camps at Treblinka, Sobibor and Bełżec were built and became operational within months of his assassination. The three facilities were collectively codenamed Operation Reinhard in Heydrich's honor. His death didn't stop the Holocaust. It became a memorial to it, genocide in his name. The Czech resistance was decimated. Most networks were destroyed in the reprisals. The underground movement never fully recovered. But politically, the assassination achieved exactly what Beneš hoped for. The destruction of Lidice created worldwide outrage. Towns across the globe renamed themselves in solidarity. Lidice, Illinois. Lidice, Mexico. Streets in the UK, South America, everywhere. The story made international headlines. Suddenly, everyone knew the Czechs were resisting. Britain formally repudiated the Munich Agreement on August 5, 1942, the agreement that had given Czech territory to Germany. Czechoslovakia's claim to restoration of its pre-war borders was strengthened. After the war, the country would be reconstituted. Heydrich's death also proved something important. High-ranking Nazis were not untouchable. The British actually drew up similar plans for Hitler in 1944, Operation Foxley, though it was never implemented. But here's what makes the operation truly controversial. The Allies and the Czech government in exile knew there would be massive reprisals. They knew innocent people would die. And they went ahead anyway. Was that a justified sacrifice? Czech patriots who died in the reprisals apparently thought so. Even under torture, they refused to betray their countrymen. Bishop Gorazd and his priests went to their deaths in silence. The broader question is harder. Is it ethical to kill one evil person if you know it will result in the deaths of thousands of innocents? The answer probably depends on whether you're making the decision in London or standing in Lidice on June 10, 1942. Reinhard Heydrich was one of the most dangerous men in Nazi Germany, the architect of the final solution, the man even other Nazis called cold and brutal. His assassination was the only successful Allied operation to kill a top-ranking Nazi during World War II. It took extraordinary courage from men like Gabčík and Kubesch, who parachuted behind enemy lines knowing they'd probably never return. But it came at a cost that's hard to comprehend. Over 5,000 Czech civilians paid with their lives. Entire villages were erased, families destroyed. The legacy of Operation Anthropoid is complicated. It's a story of extraordinary bravery and unspeakable cruelty, of difficult choices and impossible moral calculations. In the end, Heydrich died not in battle, not at the hands of his own regime, but because he was arrogant enough to drive through occupied territory in an open car without guards, and because two brave men were willing to sacrifice everything to strike back against tyranny.